I'm hungry. Purge first arrived in 2013, it introduced audiences to a chillingly simple high-concept premise, a future America where all crime, including murder, is legal for one 12-hour period each year. The film spawned an endless franchise of sequels and a television series, each exploring different facets of this annual felony free-for-all in a United States of grim that remains otherwise crime-free for the remaining 364 days. The concept worked because it committed fully to its dark premise, using genre thrills to explore themes of class warfare, government control, and the thin veneer of civilization. Now arrives One Night Only, a film that attempts to apply similar logic to the romantic comedy genre with decidedly mixed results. In this contemporary New York City world, tight-sphinctered conservatives have successfully outlawed sex for anyone unmarried, lifting the ban for just a single 12-hour window per year. Protection required, naturally. It's a premise so audacious that it immediately raises questions about logistics, enforcement, and basic plausibility. You might reasonably think that CVS would plan ahead and stack their shelves high with condoms during the countdown period leading up to this annual night of sanctioned intimacy. But removing that prophylactic shortage would rob screenwriter Travis Braun's silly script of one of the many contrived hindrances standing in the way of two reluctant lovebirds connecting. The question becomes, can a romantic comedy built on such a fundamentally absurd and politically loaded premise work as light-hearted entertainment? Can we ignore the disturbing implications long enough to invest in a love story? And most pressingly for director Will Gluck, can charming performances and glossy production values overcome a concept that seems to resist the very genre it's attempting to inhabit? The secret weapon, Monica Barbaro and Callum Turner's chemistry. Luckily for director Will Gluck, who faces the unenviable task of turning this flimsy concept into fizzy fun, he has two genuinely charming leads in Monica Barbaro and Callum Turner. Their easygoing, natural chemistry makes us actively root for them to overcome the many contrived hurdles that will take them from meet-cute through initial friction, blossoming friendship, and horny flirtation until they inevitably arrive at true romance. This might sound like faint praise, but in the context of modern romantic comedies, particularly Gluck's recent output, it represents a significant achievement. That's already considerably more than can be said for Gluck's last feature, Anyone But You, an excruciatingly unfunny rom-com whose adversarial leads, played by Sydney Sweeney and Glenn Powell, were so relentlessly self-enamored and devoid of genuine connection that it was genuinely hard to imagine anyone caring whether they ended up together or went their separate ways. The film felt like watching two attractive mannequins recite dialogue at each other while occasionally removing clothing. The performances were so wooden, the chemistry so non-existent, that the entire enterprise felt like a cynical exercise in packaging Instagram-ready stars into a formulaic framework. Yet that unwatchable dreck somehow managed to make an astounding $220 million worldwide, proving once again that predicting audience taste is a fool's errand and that I apparently know nothing about what mainstream moviegoers want. The success of Anyone But You suggests there's a massive audience hungry for traditional romantic comedy regardless of quality, content to watch beautiful people go through familiar motions in exotic locations. But it also meant that Gluck would get another chance to make a rom-com, hopefully learning from his previous film's mistakes. The inspired pairing of Turner, showing an appealing or shucks goofy side to offset his natural studly swagger, and the incandescent Barbaro, finally landing a mainstream leading role that builds on the enormous promise she demonstrated in Top Gun, Maverick and A Complete Unknown, makes One Night Only comfortably Gluck's best film since the genuinely clever 2010 Emma Stone teen comedy Easy A. Does it completely lift the lingering stench of his heinous 2014 Annie remake? Nothing ever could wash away that particular cinematic sin. But One Night Only serves as proof positive that smart, thoughtful casting can make even the most unlikely scenario not just palatable but occasionally enjoyable. The premise, satire or reality, or perhaps the scenario isn't quite as unlikely as it initially appears. Given the contemporary family values brigade's perpetual pearl-clutching about recreational sex, the ongoing legislative assaults on reproductive rights and bodily autonomy, and the widely reported sex recession among Gen Z and millennial demographics, maybe it isn't so extraordinarily hard to imagine a state-enforced veto on sex outside the bounds of traditional marriage. The film establishes its world through efficiently deployed exposition. A TV news pundit enthusiastically talks up the supposed benefits of the new social order, the dramatic decline in teen pregnancies, the near elimination of sexually transmitted diseases, and most disturbingly, the evolution of the term, incel, previously associated with toxic online communities of misogynistic men, into a badge of honor, a signifier of moral superiority and self-control. It's a neo-Puritan climate that doesn't feel entirely outside the realm of possibility, especially in our current political moment. It sounds uncomfortably like Speaker Mike Johnson's personal vision of heaven brought to legislative reality. Yet aside from the occasional bit of "fuck the mandate," graffiti spray painted on walls, a token gesture toward resistance, Gluck and Braun frustratingly declined to have any substantive political fun with the nationwide chastity edict. The film gestures towards satire without committing to it, hints at social commentary without following through, and ultimately treats its provocative premise as little more than a narrative obstacle course for the romantic leads to navigate. This represents a significant missed opportunity. A sharper, more satirically minded film could have used this premise to skewer contemporary sexual politics, purity culture, government overreach, and the ways legislation around intimacy disproportionately affects different communities. Instead, One Night Only largely uses its dystopian setting as window dressing, concerned more with manufacturing cute romantic scenarios than examining the implications of its own concept. The world-building questions that won't go away. The film's reluctance to fully explore its premise means that viewers with even minimally active critical faculties will find themselves plagued by unanswered questions throughout the runtime. I certainly spent an enormous amount of mental energy mulling over these and other logical gaps, though there will doubtless be plenty of moviegoers more willing to accept One Night Only on its own rigorously featherweight terms as it breezes along through an endless succession of peppy needle drops. How exactly is this law enforced? The film offers some hasty business involving wrist implanted biosenses that indicate marital status and presumably detect sexual activity through biological markers. But this doesn't quite explain how the government is effectively policing what goes on behind closed doors in millions of homes across the country. Our colleagues, friends, neighbors, and family members. Informing on transgressors, creating a climate of mutual surveillance similar to what Chinese civilians experienced during the 35-year one-child policy. What are the actual penalties for violation? Is there a substantial fine payable, or are offenders strictly facing incarceration? If imprisonment, for how long? Are there different penalties for first-time offenders versus repeat violators? Do people end up with criminal records that affect employment, housing, and other aspects of life? The brief scene showing someone being arrested suggests serious consequences, but we never learn the details. What was the initial impetus for this draconian legislation being introduced in the first place? Was there a moral panic, a religious revival, a public health crisis, or an authoritarian power grab that created the political conditions for such an extreme law to pass? Did it happen gradually or all at once? Was there significant public opposition, or did the majority of Americans somehow support this? Is there a fight to fornicate protest movement? Underground resistance networks, safe houses for people fleeing enforcement, civil liberties organizations challenging the law's constitutionality, communities that have found ways to subvert the surveillance system. The film shows us a society that has seemingly accepted this new reality with minimal pushback, which strains credulity given Americans' typical resistance to government intrusion. What about rape and sexual assault? Are these crimes treated differently now? Has this system made vulnerable people safer or put them at greater risk during the chaotic 12-hour window? The film doesn't touch these questions, understandably perhaps given its light tone, but their absence creates uncomfortable gaps in the world-building. These aren't pedantic nitpicks, they're fundamental questions that the film's premise naturally provokes. A more confident film would either address them cleverly or commit so fully to romantic comedy frivolity that we'd be willing to overlook them. One Night Only occupies an awkward middle ground, taking its premise seriously enough that we can't ignore it but not seriously enough to properly explore it. An all-night odyssey through New York City. The film's all-night odyssey structure is reminiscent of Martin Scorsese's After Hours, that 1985 dark comedy about a word processor operator experiencing an increasingly surreal night in downtown Manhattan. But One Night Only is like After Hours with any genuine hint of danger, darkness, or consequence carefully removed, replaced with glossy cinematography and soundtrack-ready pop songs. High among the bright, shiny comedy's genuine pleasures is the too rare cinematic treat of seeing New York City actually playing itself, instead of being a stand-in location with a handful of second-unit exteriors awkwardly inserted to suggest place. After years of watching Toronto, Vancouver, and most recently Glasgow unconvincingly double for the 5 boroughs, there's real value in seeing authentic New York locations, neighborhoods, and textures. Gluck and his cinematographer take full advantage of this, shooting on real streets, in actual establishments, capturing the specific visual character of different neighborhoods from Manhattan to Brooklyn. The production design deserves particular credit for imagining how this annual event would transform the city. We see specially themed parties, countdown clocks everywhere, promotional materials, people in costumes treating it like a twisted combination of New Year's Eve and Halloween, commercial establishments offering special services and packages. It creates a lived-in feeling that helps sell the premise more effectively than exposition dumps ever could. The queer blind spot in a city known for LGBTQ+ culture. That said, for a film set in one of the world's most vital LGBTQ+ hubs, One Night Only presents an oddly, almost aggressively heterosexual vision of New York City. By my count, the film features 2 bisexual women, 3 lesbians, one of them significantly choosing to spend the night babysitting rather than having sex, and exactly 2 gay men briefly shown smooching on a subway. For a city where queer culture has been central to its identity for decades, this feels like a glaring omission. There's a single fleeting mention of queer folks having circumvented restrictive laws for decades, a reference to the real history of LGBTQ+ people creating underground communities and support networks in response to repression, which apparently spares them the desperate 12-hour urgency feverishly gripping the rest of the city. But this raises more questions than it answers. How exactly have they circumvented these laws? Are they not subject to the same biosensor surveillance? Have they created alternative systems? Are the authorities simply not enforcing the law for same-sex couples? On a night when seemingly every heterosexual New Yorker under 40 is out partying or desperately humping in stairwells, diner booths, and any other available semi-private space, did all the gays just randomly decide to stay home? That seems not just unlikely but almost insulting in its implication that this night is exclusively for the straights, as one character explicitly states.
This representational gap is indicative of what might be called the carefree dystopian vibe of Braun's script, an ostensibly provocative premise that barely conceals an aversion to anything genuinely subversive or challenging. A more thoughtful film would have explored how different communities experience and resist this oppressive system, how queer New Yorkers with their history of police harassment and fighting for sexual freedom would respond to this new regime. Instead, they're essentially erased from the narrative, mentioned in passing but not meaningfully included. Meet Owen and Allie, our star-crossed lovers. But enough griping about the premise and world-building. Let's focus on what the film does well, its central romance and the performers bringing it to life. Callum Turner plays Owen, a likable pizzeria owner who has meticulously planned what he hopes will be a romantic and memorable night with his girlfriend Malika, played by Hawke in a frustratingly thankless role that wastes her considerable talents. Owen's evening is set to begin at a high-end sushi restaurant where he has arranged for an engagement ring to be hidden in a special cocktail, a grand romantic gesture that demonstrates both his thoughtfulness and his perhaps excessive need to plan and control outcomes. But before he can spring the proposal on her, Malika casually drops a bomb. She has decided to sleep with someone else tonight, specifically, a hot new neighbor who has caught her eye. She'll need Owen to make himself scarce and steer clear of the shared apartment for the entire night. In what might be an attempt at kindness but lands as condescension, she encourages him to seize this opportunity to explore, to step outside his pre-programmed box, to be more spontaneous. Owen is, understandably, absolutely crushed by this revelation and casual dismissal. Monica Barbaro plays Allie, a genuinely talented singer whose crippling stage fright has confined her professional life to recording advertising jingles. Reworked versions of Sarah Bareilles and Vanessa Carlton hits repurposed to push psoriasis medication and vaginal hygiene products. It's a specific, humiliating detail that tells us everything we need to know about the gap between Allie's dreams and her reality. She has the gift but not the confidence to share it with the world in the way she truly wants. Allie initially plans for a night on the town with her friend Jacinta, played by musician King Princess in an enjoyable cameo. They make a pact to be selective and careful, to stop each other from making hasty decisions as they size up the guys on offer and zero in on truly winning candidates. But Jacinta finds instant, overwhelming lust while waiting in line for the bathroom, and her swift exit with her new conquest strands Allie, forcing her to face what might be the most potentially depressing night of the year completely solo. Refusing to let her friend stay home and mope about missing the one sanctioned opportunity for intimacy all year, Allie's queer roommate Arya, played with warmth and humor by Quintessa Swindle, takes charge. She kits Allie out in sizzling glamorous attire cleverly assembled from items left behind by her own assorted ex-girlfriends, and firmly sends her out into the night to score. It's a sweet gesture of friendship that also serves as one of the film's few acknowledgments of queer life in this world. Meanwhile, Owen considers retreating to his mother's place to lick his wounds, but Linda, played by iconic 80s rom-com queen Molly Ringwald in a role that mostly involves reacting to sex talk, nixes that plan because she's preparing to entertain her boyfriend Rick, played by Star Trek and Reading Rainbow legend LeVar Burton, with some enthusiastically anticipated intimate time that we later learn involves bubble wrap in ways the film mercifully doesn't elaborate on. Poor Molly Ringwald, reduced to this after her reign as the defining face of 1980s teen romance. Don't ask for details. The meet-cute and the night's adventures begin. Thrust separately onto the streets of a city transformed into a desperate singles market, Ally and Owen collide in a classic meet-cute moment. Sparks instantly fly between them. The chemistry is immediate and palpable, suggesting that under normal circumstances, this would be the beginning of something special. But Owen kills the romantic buzz by abruptly throwing up the 2 full omakase dinners he was forced to consume alone after Malika bolted from their reservation. It's a gross-out moment that's both mortifying and oddly endearing, establishing Owen's awkward genuineness. This unfortunate incident triggers a series of events and chance encounters that set Ally and Owen on parallel but frequently overlapping courses throughout the night. The journey becomes marked by various side quests, abortive hookup attempts with other people, and a colorful parade of New York characters ranging from helpful to predatory. Among their more notable encounters is a brush with a seemingly too good to be true Pirelli played by Andrew Burnap, whose charm conceals potentially darker motives, and another with a seductive thief played by Sidney Cole Alexander who is making serious bank on a night when lots of sex-starved, desperate guys are especially vulnerable to being conned out of their money and valuables. The film populates its New York landscape with a variety of colorful characters, some more successfully realized than others. There's a sexually forward bartender played by Julia Fox, bringing her distinctive downtown art world energy to what amounts to an extended cameo. Charlie Gillespie appears as a narcissistic anti-mandate rock star who has built his brand around opposition to the law while clearly benefiting from the attention it brings him. Ella Loudon plays a libidinous British ladyboss who appears to be directly channeling Tilda Swinton's particular brand of imperious sexuality. The cameo parade, hit and miss. Beyond these character roles, there's an almost excessive parade of cameos, some of them officially billed in the credits and others left as surprises for audiences to discover. Michelle Hurd and Mike Birbiglia appear as cops navigating this chaotic night, bringing gravitas and humor respectively to their brief scenes. In perhaps the film's most surreal touch, Flavor Flav, yes, that Flavor Flav, officiates the 7 p.m. countdown that kicks off the 12-hour window, treating it with the ceremonial importance of New Year's Eve in Times Square. There are also several unbilled cameos, including a pair of instantly recognizable faces appearing as actors shooting a cop drama for the streaming service Tubi, a meta joke about the current state of the entertainment industry that will land differently depending on viewers' familiarity with where certain actors have ended up career-wise. I genuinely wish I could report that some of these cameo episodes were uproariously funny, providing the kind of memorable set-piece moments that elevate romantic comedies into quotable classics. But at best, they're mildly amusing with only a handful of exceptions that provoke more than polite chuckles. I did laugh at repeated references to the apparently ubiquitous straight dude fashion choice of Buck Mason, a clothing brand that has indeed become something of a uniform for a certain type of urban professional man, and the film mines this observation for ongoing jokes about male conformity and the illusion of individuality. Interestingly, 2 of the biggest laugh responses from the preview audience I attended came from self-referential visual in jokes directly involving Gluck's Anyone But You leads, Sydney Sweeney and Glenn Powell. These moments function as the director winking at audiences who saw his previous film, acknowledging its existence while perhaps suggesting he's learned from its mistakes. Whether these references will land for viewers unfamiliar with Anyone But You is questionable, but they demonstrate Gluck's awareness of his own filmography and willingness to have fun with it. In press materials and interviews, Gluck has articulated his desire to comment on the contemporary difficulty of finding genuine love and connection in a modern dating scene where an seemingly infinite assortment of potential partners is just a phone swipe away. It's an observation about the paradox of choice, that having unlimited options actually makes meaningful connection harder rather than easier, leading to a perpetual sense that someone better might be just one more swipe away. This is undoubtedly a relevant and resonant theme, particularly for younger audiences navigating dating apps, hookup culture, and the anxiety that comes with both abundance and isolation. The film attempts to use its extreme premise, reducing an entire year's worth of potential intimate connection to a single frenzied night, as a literalization of the pressure and desperation that many people feel in the modern dating landscape. However, the paradoxical isolation of our hyper-connected age is a point that's been made more cogently, more thoughtfully, and with greater insight in approximately 800 million films, television shows, and think pieces in recent years. From Her to Black Mirror episodes to countless indie dramas about millennial malaise, this thematic territory has been thoroughly explored. One Night Only doesn't bring particularly fresh perspective or insight to these questions, instead treating them as familiar background radiation that justifies its premise without deeply engaging with the implications. A more successful approach might have been to fully commit to either the dystopian satire or the romantic comedy, rather than trying to split the difference. As satire, the film could have used its absurd premise to genuinely interrogate modern sexual politics, dating culture, and government control. As pure romantic comedy, it could have leaned into the inherent comedy of two people who clearly belong together refusing to see it. Instead, it awkwardly straddles both approaches without fully committing to either. Despite its conceptual problems, One Night Only does feature thoughtful touches that demonstrate care in execution. The substitution of Washington Heights' Little Red Lighthouse, a small, charming lighthouse under the George Washington Bridge, for the traditional rom-com destination of the Empire State Building is a genuinely cute touch that shows local knowledge and a desire to celebrate lesser-known New York landmarks. The production design consistently impresses with its attention to how this annual event would permeate every aspect of city life. Bars advertise special deals, hotels offer themed packages, clothing stores display window mannequins in provocative outfits with countdown clocks, street vendors sell related merchandise. These background details create texture and verisimilitude that help the world feel lived in rather than merely theoretical. The film also deserves credit for its energetic pacing. Even when the script is at its most effortful, straining to generate complications and obstacles, Gluck keeps things moving briskly enough that we don't have too much time to dwell on logical inconsistencies. The editing maintains momentum, the soundtrack provides propulsive energy, and the attractive locations offer consistent visual interest. But mostly, ultimately, what keeps One Night Only motoring along watchably is the effortless appeal of Monica Barbaro and Callum Turner as hopeless romantics on a night ostensibly dedicated to instant carnal gratification rather than emotional connection. Even when Braun's screenplay is at its most contrived, when the obstacles feel manufactured rather than organic, when the dialogue lands with a thud rather than sparkle, these two performers sell it through sheer charisma and committed performances. Barbaro brings a luminous warmth to Ali, making her simultaneously aspirational and relatable. She's beautiful but approachable, talented but insecure, hopeful but guarded. It's a star-making performance that should finally position her for the leading roles she's been ready for since her breakthrough. She handles both the comedy and the more tender moments with equal skill, never condescending to the material even when the material doesn't quite rise to meet her abilities. Turner matches her beat for beat, revealing unexpected comic chops alongside his established dramatic skills and natural leading man presence. His own could have been merely a bumbling nice guy archetype, but Turner finds specific quirks and vulnerabilities that make him feel like an actual person. The physical comedy of his early scenes, the vomiting, the awkward encounters, the desperate attempts to salvage dignity, works because Turner commits fully without mugging or overselling. Most crucially, Barbaro and Turner convince us utterly that these two people would genuinely like each other, would want to spend time together beyond the immediate pressure of the ticking clock. Their banter feels natural rather than scripted, the growing connection earned rather than mandated by rom-com formula. In their scenes together, we can glimpse the much better, smarter film that might have been built around them with a stronger script. One Night Only often brought out my inner curmudgeon, activating critical faculties that made it difficult to simply relax and enjoy the ride. The unanswered questions about world-building, the missed opportunities for satire, the superficial engagement with its own provocative premise, the tonal inconsistencies, all of these elements created friction that prevented full investment in the romantic journey. But there's no denying that a substantial audience exists hungry to see pretty people in exactly this kind of frothy, undemanding entertainment. The success of anyone but you proved that quality is not necessarily the determining factor in romantic comedy box office performance. Many viewers simply want attractive leads, exotic or interesting locations, a peppy soundtrack, and the comforting predictability of genre conventions executed with basic competence. For that audience, One Night Only delivers adequately if not exceptionally. It's certainly more watchable than Gluck's previous rom-com effort, offering genuine chemistry and occasional laughs even if it never reaches the heights of truly great entries in the genre. The New York locations provide visual interest beyond the typical rom-com setting, and the high-concept premise offers at least the illusion of freshness even if the execution is conventional. At the very least, the film might serve as an effective date night aphrodisiac for young and possibly celibate viewers, bless them. There's something to be said for a film that might inspire couples to appreciate their own freedom to be intimate without government-imposed restrictions, even as it fails to fully grapple with the horrifying implications of its premise. One Night Only ultimately succeeds as a testament to the power of casting and chemistry to overcome significant structural and conceptual weaknesses. In a just world, Monica Barbaro and Callum Turner would have been given a smarter script that didn't require viewers to ignore so many logical gaps and missed opportunities. They would have been placed in a film that either fully committed to satirizing contemporary sexual politics and dating culture or fully embraced romantic comedy frivolity without the dystopian baggage. Instead, they're the best elements of a fundamentally compromised film, working overtime to sell a premise that never quite coheres and a story that never quite justifies its own provocative setup. Their performances deserve a better showcase, but they're professional enough to elevate what they've been given to the level of adequately entertaining if ultimately forgettable romantic comedy. For viewers able to switch off the critical faculties and accept the film on its own lightweight terms, One Night Only offers a pleasant enough diversion featuring two extremely attractive people with genuine chemistry navigating a glossy, sanitized version of New York City. For those unable to stop asking questions about enforcement mechanisms, political implications, and logical consistency, the film will prove frustrating in its refusal to engage with its own premise meaningfully. Will Gluck has demonstrated once again that he can deliver a slick, professional-looking product with appealing stars and commercial viability. What he hasn't yet proven post-Easy A is the ability to marry that commercial instinct with genuinely smart writing and thoughtful execution. One Night Only represents progress from the wasteland of Anyone But You, but it's still far from the genre resurgence that romantic comedy fans desperately crave. The film serves as a reminder that high-concept premises require more than just an elevator pitch. They need thorough development, consistent world-building, and a clear vision of whether they're serving as satire or simply backdrop. One Night Only never quite figures out what it wants to be beyond a vehicle for two charming stars, and while that's enough to carry it to watchability, it's not enough to make it memorable. In the end, One Night Only is a shiny, pleasant, frustratingly shallow romantic comedy that will entertain those willing to overlook its many conceptual problems in favor of its surface pleasures. It's proof that charismatic performances can compensate for a multitude of scripting sins, but also a missed opportunity to create something genuinely special from a genuinely provocative premise. The rom-com genre remains in need of resuscitation, and while this film won't kill it, it won't save it either. The romantic comedy genre has been gasping for air for well over a decade now, a shadow of its former glory when films like When Harry Met Sally, Notting Hill, and The Proposal dominated both box offices and cultural conversations. Every few months, a new entry emerges promising to be the savior that resurrects this beloved genre, only to fall short of expectations and fade quickly from our collective memory. Going into any modern rom-com, audiences arrive with a standard set of questions that have become almost ritualistic in their predictability. Will the lead actors generate genuine, electric chemistry that makes us believe in their connection? Will the romantic elements and comedic beats achieve the delicate balance that defined the genre's golden age? And perhaps most pressingly in recent years, will this finally be the film that reminds us why we fell in love with romantic comedies in the first place? Universal Pictures' late summer offering, One Night Only, represents the first wide-releasing romantic comedy since April, a telling detail about the current state of theatrical rom-coms. Yet this film brings with it far more probing questions than your typical boy meets girl scenario. This is a movie that has been colloquially dubbed Sex Purge around the internet, and once you understand its premise, the nickname makes perfect, uncomfortable sense. The film emerges from what must have been a truly wild elevator pitch, likely delivered after several cocktails, imagining a dystopian America where single people are legally permitted to have sex on only one night per year. It's a concept so audacious, so ripe with disturbing implications, that it immediately raises eyebrows and concerns about tone, execution, and basic narrative coherence. Handmaid's Tale meets Hollywood meet cute. On paper, the central conceit of One Night Only reads like the setup for a harrowing dystopian thriller in the vein of The Handmaid's Tale or the Purge franchise itself. A totalitarian government asserting extreme, invasive control over citizens' bodies and intimate lives, dictating when and how people can express their sexuality. This is the stuff of Margaret Atwood nightmares, not sunny romantic escapism. The very concept demands serious interrogation of government overreach, bodily autonomy, surveillance states, and the fundamental human right to privacy and self-determination. Instead, director Will Gluck and screenwriter Travis Braun use this genuinely disturbing premise as mere backdrop for a glossy, upbeat meet-cute scenario, complete with a peppy top 40 soundtrack designed to drown out any screams of protest, both from characters within the world and thoughtful viewers watching it unfold. The cognitive dissonance is immediate and persistent. As the story of two attractive singles navigating their connection plays out, the viewer's mind can't help but wander to the darker implications lurking just beneath the film's shiny surface. How exactly would such a government enforce this draconian sexual tyranny? What horrifying punishments await those brave or desperate enough to choose personal freedom over state-mandated abstinence? What does daily life look like under such oppression? How did America fall so far? These aren't trivial world-building questions that can be brushed aside. They're fundamental concerns that the film's very premise demands we consider. And herein lies the central, fatal flaw of One Night Only. It's asking a breezy summer romp to bear weight it was never designed to carry. The result is an overstuffed yet paradoxically undercooked soufflé of a film that can't quite rise to the occasion it's set for itself. The film opens with introductory text that immediately sets a tone of surreal absurdity, apparently unintentionally so, as evidenced by the baffled, uncomfortable laughter that rippled through my screening audience. We're informed, with the earnestness of a historical documentary, that premarital sex has been outlawed in the United States, and is now legal for only 12 hours on one designated night each year. The expository narration describes this as a government-decreed sexual climate, where it has become a badge of honor to be an incel, a term loaded with such toxic cultural baggage that its casual deployment here feels tone-deaf at best and actively harmful at worst. This new reality, we're told, is the result of an ideological grenade thrown at the American people by Congress, though the film never adequately explains the political path that led to such an extreme measure or who exactly advocated for it. The enforcement mechanism is straight out of Black Mirror. Citizens have been fitted with biosensors that detect the specific chemicals released during sexual activity. These sensors display red under normal circumstances and turn green only when someone gets married or during the designated sex purge night. It's an Orwellian surveillance system that makes constant, invasive monitoring of citizens' most intimate moments not just possible but mandatory. The film briefly acknowledges that breaking this law carries severe consequences, showing us a fleeting scene of an older man being roughly dragged into a police station for the crime of being human, of experiencing sexual desire outside the permitted window. On the designated night itself, chaos erupts as single people desperately scramble to find partners, turning cities into what resembles a combination of New Year's Eve, the Purge, and a particularly aggressive singles mixer. Protection is mandatory, a rare acknowledgement of public health concerns in this dystopia, but condom surge pricing reaches an eye-watering $2,000 per unit, adding an element of economic punishment to the sexual regulation. It's a detail that raises yet another question the film doesn't explore: how do lower-income citizens navigate this night compared to the wealthy? Our protagonists, Owen and Ali, navigate the night. New York City serves as our setting, which makes perfect sense for a film concerned with both singledom and sexuality. The city that never sleeps becomes the city that must compress an entire year's worth of intimate connection into one frenzied night. We follow Owen, played by Callum Turner, and Ali, portrayed by recent Oscar nominee Monica Barbaro, as they hunt for sexual partners against a ticking clock that adds supposed urgency to every interaction. Owen's night begins with a plan already in place. He's arranged to spend the evening with his girlfriend, played by Hawke in a brief appearance. However, she chooses this night as the perfect opportunity to sleep with their attractive neighbor instead, leaving Owen suddenly partnerless mere hours before the window opens. It's a betrayal that should sting more than the film allows it to, but we must move quickly past any genuine emotion to get to the hijinks. Meanwhile, Ali is being encouraged by her queer roommate, who dismisses the night as one, for the straights, to put on a revealing dress and get herself out there. This throwaway line raises interesting questions about how LGBTQ+ citizens exist within this heteronormative legislative framework, questions the film has absolutely no interest in exploring. Ali is reluctant, not particularly excited about the cattle market atmosphere the night has become, but she ventures out nonetheless. When Owen and Ali's paths inevitably intersect, the film presents us with its central conceit and biggest logical hurdle. For reasons that never quite crystallize into coherence, they decide not to have sex with each other. Instead, in a narrative choice that feels forced by rom-com convention rather than organic character motivation, they decide to play wingman for one another, traveling from Manhattan to Brooklyn and back again, helping each other find other partners. It's a premise that might work in a standard romantic comedy where two people have plenty of time to realize they're perfect for each other, but in a world where they have literally 12 hours to find someone and face an entire year of enforced abstinence if they fail. The decision strains credibility past the breaking point. Production values. New York actually looks like New York. After the unforgivably unconvincing use of Glasgow as a shabby stand-in for New York in the previous week's Spider-Man sequel, scenes that often looked like they were shot on a Broadway musical set rather than real city streets, one of One Night Only's most significant achievements is its authentic, up-close, and immersive on-location shooting throughout actual New York City. The film captures real neighborhoods, real streets, real establishments, lending a textural credibility to the proceedings that helps ground the fantastical premise in recognizable reality. Director Will Gluck has proven himself a savvy commercial filmmaker, and there's an undeniable bright, poppy slickness to how his film looks and moves. The cinematography is crisp and colorful, the editing maintains energetic momentum, and the overall aesthetic achieves a polished sheen that stands in stark contrast to Netflix's parade of murkily flat, TV movie quality romantic comedies. Gluck understands visual grammar and commercial appeal in ways that many contemporary rom-com directors don't, creating a product that at least looks like it belongs on a big screen. However, as with his previous film, the surprise box office smash Anyone But You, Gluck has mastered the sleek aesthetic of a 2000s throwback rom-com without capturing the wit, warmth, or narrative sophistication that made the best films of that era endure. He's perfected the surface while missing the soul. The production design deserves particular credit for its attention to detail. Nearly every scene incorporates visual clues about how this oppressive law has affected day-to-day life. Billboards advertise sex purge parties, storefronts display countdown clocks, clothing stores feature special purge night outfits, and restaurants offer themed menus. This level of world-building shows genuine thought and creates a more immersive environment.
Yet this very attention to environmental detail only highlights the script's failure to think through the deeper implications of this world. We see how commerce has adapted to exploit the night, but we don't see resistance movements, support groups for those traumatized by the system, or communities that have found ways to maintain intimacy and connection despite the restrictions. The world feels decorated rather than lived in. The chemistry question. Turner and Barbaro. The leads in One Night Only represent a merciful improvement over Gluck's previous outing. Anyone But You starred Sydney Sweeney and Glenn Powell in what might charitably be described as one of the most criminally vacant pairings ever inflicted upon the romantic comedy genre. Two attractive people generating approximately zero sparks, reading dialogue with the chemistry of strangers waiting for different buses. Callum Turner and Monica Barbaro fare considerably better. Turner, who recently appeared in Masters of the Air, brings a lanky charm and capable comic timing to Owen, while Barbaro, fresh off her Oscar-nominated turn in Top Gun, Maverick, demonstrates the kind of natural charisma and grounded warmth that romantic comedy heroines require. They're both talented performers who look good together and manage to sell their attraction through body language and glances even when the script fails them. However, being more watchable than Cowell and Sweeney is an extremely low bar to clear. The fundamental problem remains that screenwriter Travis Braun, working in theatrical features for the first time after a career in children's television, hasn't provided smart or specific enough writing to justify why these two clearly compatible people wouldn't simply go to bed together upon first meeting. Yes, Owen has just vomited up 2 omakase meals near Ali's feet in their initial encounter. A gross-out moment meant to be endearingly awkward, but also, and this cannot be stressed enough, it's sex purge night. Everyone is desperately looking for a partner. They have 12 hours. The stakes could not be clearer. In a traditional romantic comedy, obstacles keeping the couple apart make sense. They work together, one is engaged to someone else, they come from different worlds, they're moving to different cities, they met at the wrong time. Here, the obstacle is purely arbitrary, they just decide not to. Because the movie needs them to spend more time together. It's scriptwriting convenience masquerading as character choice, and it undermines our investment in their journey from the very beginning. The banter between Owen and Ali ranges from ho-hum to occasionally sparkling, but it's mostly too perfunctory and generic to provoke genuine investment in their outcome. We get the standard beats. Light teasing, discovering unexpected common ground, sharing mildly vulnerable confessions, defending each other to potential partners. Turner and Barbaro are professional enough to sell these moments with committed performances, but they can't transcend the fundamental thinness of what they've been given. Their characters lack the specific quirks, backgrounds, dreams, and fears that would make them feel like real people rather than rom-com placeholders. Structure and pacing. A sex caper, not a romance. One Night Only functions less as a romantic comedy in the traditional sense and more as an attempt at a raunchy, though ultimately rather coy, sex caper. The structure follows Owen and Ali from scrape to scrape, close call to close call, almost conquest to almost conquest, as they bounce between venues and potential partners. It's episodic rather than building, a series of set pieces rather than a coherent narrative arc. The film features a parade of ineffective and unfunny cameos from actors who deserve better material. Julia Fox appears briefly, Pete Davidson shows up doing his usual shtick, Molly Ringwald, the queen of 1980s teen romance herself, is criminally underused, Nicholas Braun pops in, and Roma Mafia makes an appearance. None of these talented performers are given anything particularly memorable to do, their famous faces providing momentary recognition value rather than characters serving the story. There's a gimmicky, almost ADHD quality to the film's construction and its constant barrage of pop culture references, as if the filmmakers were desperately trying to keep Gen Z audiences looking at the screen rather than scrolling through their phones. While I appreciated how this manic energy manifested in detailed production design, nearly every scene incorporates visual information about how the law has affected everyday life. It also felt like distraction, a way of papering over the fact that the script is made up of moments rather than constituting a fully realized story. The film lacks a thought-through character journey for either protagonist. Owen needs to learn to plan less and be more spontaneous. Maybe. And Ali needs to sing more. Or embrace vulnerability. Or something. The character arcs are muddy at best, non-existent at worst. We never get a clear sense of who these people were before this night, what emotional wounds or desires drive them beyond the immediate need for sex, or how this experience meaningfully changes them. In classic romantic comedies, the external plot, the wacky situation, the misunderstandings, the obstacles, serves the internal journey of two people learning what they truly need and finding it in each other. Here, the situation is so overwhelming and bizarre that it overshadows any internal development. We're too busy processing the dystopian nightmare world to connect with the emotional growth that should be happening. One of the most surprising and troubling aspects of One Night Only is how progressively sex-negative it becomes as it unfolds. In a film ostensibly about people seeking sexual connection, there's a growing tendency to either ridicule those who want sex or apply a moral superiority to those who abstain or seek meaningful connection instead. Characters who embrace the physical aspect of the night are portrayed as desperate, shallow, or pathetic. Those who claim to be looking for something deeper, even within the constraints of a 12-hour window, are implicitly validated as more evolved or virtuous. It's a strange, almost puritanical undercurrent running through a film about a sex purge, and it becomes increasingly difficult to ignore. This tonal confusion reaches its peak in the film's resolution, which I won't spoil in detail but which essentially validates the idea that maybe this forced scarcity has made intimacy more meaningful, that perhaps there's wisdom in the government's restriction of sexual freedom. It's a deeply troubling conclusion that plays like unintentional propaganda for the very system the film should be critiquing. The film can't decide whether it's satirizing sexual repression or ultimately endorsing it, whether it's celebrating human desire or suggesting we'd all be better off with less of it. This fundamental ambivalence about its own premise creates a queasy viewing experience where you're never quite sure what point is being made or what values are being championed. One Night Only exists in a paradoxical state of having both too much and not enough world-building. The film answers just enough questions about how this society functions to prompt viewers to ask 10 more that go completely unaddressed. For instance, why does no one ever mention masturbation? Wouldn't that also trigger the biosensors that detect sexual arousal and release? If not, wouldn't everyone just do that instead? If so, is that also illegal? Are people monitored constantly for solo sexual activity? The implications are horrifying, but the film never acknowledges this elephant in the room. How did this law pass? What was the political coalition that supported it? Was it religious conservatives? Is this a theocracy now? Was there a precipitating crisis that made this seem necessary? Did people vote for this, or was it imposed by an authoritarian government? If the latter, where are the resistance movements? What about people in relationships who aren't married? Are they forced to marry or face a year of abstinence? What about non-monogamous people? What about asexual people? Are they finally free from social pressure, or are they forced to participate anyway? What about people with disabilities that make the biosensor system problematic? How does this affect birth rates? Are married couples having more children to compensate? Is there a demographic crisis? What about rape and assault? Are they taken more seriously now, or has this system actually made things worse by creating a night when everything goes? The brief glimpses we get of the purge night suggest chaos and desperation that could easily turn dangerous. The film shows us that enforcement is harsh. We see someone being arrested, but doesn't explain the prison system, the trials, the sentences. Is sex outside the designated time a misdemeanor or a felony? Do people lose their jobs, their children, their homes? Is there a sex offender registry, and if so, who ends up on it? These aren't nitpicking questions, they're essential to understanding whether the world makes any internal sense. And the film's failure to address them isn't clever ambiguity, it's a failure of imagination and commitment to the premise. Beyond the narrative and tonal issues, One Night Only faces a significant political problem. Its release timing couldn't be worse. The film arrives at a genuinely dark political moment in American history, when reproductive rights have been rolled back, when government control over bodies, particularly women's bodies, has become not a dystopian fantasy but a lived reality for millions. When bodily autonomy is under genuine threat, when people are being criminalized for seeking health care, when legislation about intimate aspects of human life is being dictated by increasingly extreme ideological positions, a glossy Hollywood comedy that treats government sexual regulation as a quirky premise for romantic hijinks feels, at best, tone-deaf and, at worst, actively offensive. The film asks us to ignore the ramifications of its premise, to not think too hard about what it would really mean to live in such a society, to just enjoy the ride. But in 2024, that's an impossible ask. We can't unsee the connections between the film's fictional dystopia and the very real erosion of rights happening in the present day. Moreover, the film asks us to root for characters who aren't trying to actively destroy this barbaric system. Owen and Allie accept the reality of sex purge night. They work within it. They never question whether this is right or just. Imagine if Katniss Everdeen just had fun during the Hunger Games. If she'd treated children being forced to murder each other as an opportunity for personal growth rather than a moral atrocity to be resisted. That's essentially what One Night Only asks of us, and it's a fundamentally compromised position. The film would work better as outright satire, leaning into the horror of the premise and using the romance to illustrate how human connection persists even under oppressive systems. Or it could work as resistance narrative, with our heroes fighting the system while falling for each other. Instead, it tries to have its dystopian cake and eat it with romantic comedy frosting, and the flavors don't blend, they clash. Perhaps the most unsettling aspect of One Night Only is how it ultimately plays like propaganda for the very system it presents. This is a film about sex purge, released in time for sex purge within its own narrative world, that seems to conclude that maybe sex purge isn't such a bad idea after all. By the end, the film has normalized the premise. What should feel shocking and wrong has been softened through romantic comedy conventions until it seems almost reasonable. The film suggests that this forced scarcity has made people value intimacy more, that the desperation of the night leads to more meaningful connections, that perhaps there was too much casual sex before and this has corrected an imbalance. It's a deeply conservative conclusion dressed up in progressive, sex-positive clothing. The film wants credit for being edgy and raunchy while ultimately reinforcing traditional values about sex being more meaningful when it's rare and regulated. This ideological confusion, or perhaps clarity masquerading as confusion, leaves a bad taste. In a competent satire, we'd see the human cost of this system clearly, and the romance would serve as evidence of human resilience and the impossibility of truly regulating desire. Instead, we get a film that seems to think the system has some merit, that the government might be onto something, that sexual restriction might actually be good for society. Whether this is intentional messaging or simply the result of not thinking through the implications of the premise is unclear. But the effect is the same, a film that normalizes authoritarian control over the most intimate aspects of human life. One Night Only is ultimately a failed experiment, an ambitious swing that misses on almost every level. It's not funny enough to work as comedy, not romantic enough to succeed as romance, not thoughtful enough to function as satire, and not committed enough to its premise to work as dystopian fiction. The film's core problem is one of conception. The premise is simply too dark, too loaded with disturbing implications, to serve as the backdrop for a light romantic romp. No amount of glossy production values, attractive leads, or peppy soundtrack can overcome the fundamental dissonance between the dystopian world and the breezy tone. Will Gluck's direction is competent but not inspired enough to navigate these treacherous tonal waters. Travis Braun's script needed several more drafts to either fully commit to the darkness or find a way to make the premise less oppressive. The performances are fine but can't transcend the material's limitations. For a genre desperately in need of resuscitation, One Night Only is not the cure. It may actually set the cause back further. It will likely join the long list of forgettable romantic comedies that briefly occupy screens before vanishing from cultural memory, remembered only as that sex purge movie that couldn't figure out what it wanted to say. The romantic comedy genre can handle high concepts and social commentary. Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind proved that emotional romance can coexist with science fiction premises, while Knocked Up and Obvious Child showed that rom-coms can tackle controversial subjects with both humor and heart. But those films understood what they were about, took their premises seriously, and grounded fantastical situations in genuine human emotion. One Night Only wants to have it both ways, to present a shocking premise without examining it, to invoke dystopia without committing to its implications. To be edgy without being challenging. The result is a film that doesn't work on any level, that leaves audiences wondering not, will they end up together? But, how did this premise get approved and why didn't anyone question it? In trying to answer whether this is the rom-com that resurrects the genre, the answer is a resounding no. Instead, One Night Only serves as a cautionary tale about the importance of matching premise to tone, about thinking through your world-building, and about understanding the cultural moment into which you're releasing a film. It's a glossy, well-shot mess that mistakes a provocative concept for an actual story and hopes that attractive leads and New York locations can compensate for a script that never figured out what it wanted to say. The saddest part is that buried somewhere in this premise is a genuinely interesting film about intimacy, connection, and resistance under authoritarianism. But that film would require a completely different script, a different tone, and a different level of commitment to examining what it would really mean to live in such a world. One Night Only is content to skim the surface, and in doing so, drowns in its own shallow waters. Somewhere in the middle of One Night Only, Will Gluck's glossy new dystopian romantic comedy for Universal Pictures, you can feel the ghost of a much better movie fighting to get out. It's there in the premise. It's there in Monica Barbaro's fearless comic energy. It's there, faintly, in the DNA of Travis Braun's original screenplay, which topped the 2024 Blacklist and now arrives in theaters on August 7, 2026, dramatically rewritten by the director himself. But the finished film, a slick, R-rated, 102-minute studio comedy stuffed with a genuinely startling ensemble cast, never quite becomes the movie its own logline promises. One Night Only is a rom-com about the last night of legal desire in an authoritarian America, and somehow it has almost nothing to say about either desire or authoritarianism.
That's the review in miniature, but the full story is stranger, funnier in fits and starts, and ultimately more disappointing than a simple pan would suggest. Because One Night Only isn't a lazy movie. It's an over-engineered one, dressed up with meta-jokes, needle drops, and a cast that includes Molly Ringwald, LeVar Burton, Julia Fox, Z-Way, Mike Birbiglia, Ben Marshall, Andrew Burnap, Charlie Gillespie, Quintessa Swindell, King Princess, and even Flavor Flav. This is a film that wants you to notice how much effort went into it. What it can't do is explain why any of that effort was spent on a love story this thin, wrapped around a dystopia this undercooked. The Blacklist screenplay that started it all. Before Will Gluck ever touched it, One Night Only was Travis Braun's spec script, and it's still available to read for free online if you go looking. The opening pages lay out the premise with a bluntness the finished film never quite matches. In the near future, premarital sex has been outlawed across the United States, except for one night a year. It's a clean, nasty little hook, the kind of high-concept sentence that makes studio executives sit up in their chairs. You can see exactly why it topped the Blacklist, the annual survey of Hollywood's most liked unproduced screenplays, and exactly why a filmmaker coming off a $220 million worldwide hit like Anyone But You would want to option it immediately. Reading Braun's draft against Gluck's finished film is a genuinely useful exercise, because the differences tell you almost everything about what went wrong. Braun's script understood its dystopia as the engine of the story, not the wallpaper behind it. His protagonists don't merely survive a single reckless night, they come out the other side with something to say about the system that manufactured their desperation. Gluck, credited as the film's rewriter alongside Braun, keeps the scaffolding, the countdown, the government mandate, the one legal window between 7 p.m. and 7 a.m., but hollows out the political spine that made the original such a hot property in the first place. It's the classic Hollywood trick of buying a script for its edge and then sanding that edge off in the edit bay. Will Gluck's meta-instincts, curdled. Gluck has always been a director who wants you to know his movies know their movies. That's part of his charm, going back to Easy A in 2010, his beloved riff on The Scarlet Letter that turned Emma Stone into a star practically overnight. It's there in Friends with Benefits, in both of his Peter Rabbit films, and it's there again, unmistakably, in One Night Only's opening titles, which foreground the audience's exhausted 2026 reality before the fictional love story even begins. A cutesy title card essentially winks at the camera and admits, yeah, it's been a lot, an acknowledgement of just how much collective dread audiences are carrying into a movie theater right now. At his best, that self-aware instinct gives Gluck's comedies a shaggy, conspiratorial warmth, like the filmmaker, the characters, and the audience are all surviving the humiliation of modern intimacy together. It's part of what made Anyone But You such a sleeper hit, and it's part of why critics were willing to extend Gluck more benefit of the doubt going into One Night Only than they'd give almost any other studio rom-com director working today. But that same wink, applied to a premise this loaded, starts to feel less like solidarity and more like a shrug. Reproductive oppression, queer erasure, consumerism, incel culture, the emotional paralysis of an entire generation of young people, One Night Only gestures at all of it. It commits to none of it. Recognizing a problem on screen is not the same thing as interrogating it, and a filmmaker with Gluck's clout and box office leverage really should know the difference by now. The meet cute, a great hook undone by vomit. 3 years after the United States criminalizes premarital sex, the film picks up on the one annual night when unmarried citizens can hook up without fear of arrest. Monica Barbaro is a jingle singer who writes suspiciously catchy commercial hooks for pharmaceutical ads, and she intends to make the absolute most of her one legal night. Callum Turner runs a pizza shop and has just been blindsided by his longtime girlfriend, Monica Hawke, who informs him she plans to spend mandate night with someone else. Recently dumped and reeling, Owen is nowhere near as eager to participate in the citywide scramble as Allie is. On paper, that's a fantastic hook for a meet cute. One part high-concept farce, one part dystopian satire, with a built-in ticking clock and an obvious, tantalizing question hanging over the whole night: what does forbidden intimacy actually look like once the government has criminalized it? Allie and Owen's first collision on the street works well enough as a comic set piece. Then Owen, visibly anxious and overwhelmed, throws up sushi in front of her, and their chemistry resets to zero before the movie has even earned a second scene together. It's a bold, gross-out swing for a first act, and it's genuinely funny in isolation. The trouble is what comes after. The Purge comparison everyone's making. It's impossible to talk about One Night Only without acknowledging the elephant in the multiplex. Universal is the same studio behind the Purge franchise, and several critics have already pointed out the cheeky symmetry of a company that built a horror empire on one lawless night a year now building a rom-com around one legal night a year. It's a clever marketing hook, and it's not an accident. Where The Purge imagines a single 12-hour window in which every crime, including murder, becomes legal, One Night Only flips the concept into something gentler and stranger. A 12-hour window, running from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m., in which the one previously illegal act on the table is consensual sex between unmarried adults. That framing invites an obvious comparison to Martin Scorsese's After Hours, another film about a single chaotic night of escalating mishaps across New York City, and it's a comparison One Night Only clearly wants critics to make. But After Hours earns its anxiety through genuine menace and formal control. One Night Only borrows the structure, the missed connections, the near misses, the sense of a city conspiring against its protagonist, without ever generating the same dread or momentum. It wants the cachet of prestige inspiration and the comfort of studio rom-com predictability at the same time, and mostly it just ends up feeling like neither. A slow burn spoof without a reason to believe it. From that disastrous first encounter, One Night Only settles into the loose shape of a friends to lovers spoof, following Allie and Owen as they keep colliding across a chaotic New York night full of missteps, side quests, and near misses. That structure could absolutely work as a breezy afternoon at the movies. Gluck has built entire hits out of less. But he and Braun never explain why these two specific people are right for each other. A love story is supposed to reveal character. It's supposed to tell you something about who these people are underneath the plot mechanics that keep throwing them together. Instead, Allie and Owen stay frustratingly generic, defined mostly by their circumstances rather than their personalities. That's a real problem for a movie whose entire premise depends on urgency. The countdown clock that gave Braun's screenplay its propulsive tension becomes almost meaningless once it hits the screen. There's no mounting panic, no true erotic urgency, and no persuasive reason these two people need to end up together before sunrise, New Year's Eve style. Without that ticking clock pressure, One Night Only struggles to answer the single most commercially important question a romantic comedy can ask. Why should anyone buy a ticket to watch these two people fall in love under conditions this unpleasant? The look and sound of a movie that doesn't trust its own premise. Cinematographer Yaron Orbach, shooting on location in New York City, gives One Night Only the same warm, glossy, golden hour sheen that's defined nearly every modern studio rom-com since the genre's mid-2010s revival. That's not necessarily a criticism on its own. Audiences show up for this kind of movie partly because it looks like a comforting postcard of Manhattan at its most cinematic. But there's a strange dissonance in applying that aesthetic to a dystopia. A country that has criminalized premarital sex and built an entire cultural apparatus around a single legal night should probably look a little more oppressive than this. Instead, the production design treats Mandate Night almost like New Year's Eve with better lighting, string lights, crowded sidewalks, a general sense of citywide festivity that never once suggests anyone is genuinely afraid of what happens if they get caught. The soundtrack follows the same logic, leaning on upbeat needle drops and glossy pop cues clearly engineered for a trailer rather than a coherent tonal statement. It's efficient filmmaking in the sense that every scene knows exactly how it wants you to feel in the moment. It's much less effective as a piece of world building, because a film this polished can't simultaneously convince you that its characters are living under authoritarian sexual control. The tension between fun studio comedy and quietly fascist premise never resolves, it just sits there, unaddressed, for the entire runtime. Political satire that never commits. The critical question hovering over One Night Only isn't really whether it understands contemporary American politics. It's whether Will Gluck still understands why audiences fell for his sensibility in the first place. Compare this film to Easy A, where Olive Pendergast doesn't merely survive the slut-shaming narrative imposed on her, she hijacks it, staging a viral webcam confessional and eventually a live protest during a school basketball game, seizing control of her own story in the process. That film had teeth because its heroine refused to be a passenger in her own life. Allie and Owen, by contrast, spend nearly all of One Night Only obeying the law. They encounter so-called criminals almost as often as they encounter police, yet neither the loneliness of living under this mandate nor its legal stakes ever feel real or dangerous. The film's supporting characters broadly accept corporate manipulation and government overreach as simple, unavoidable facts of daily life. Nobody dreams of dismantling the system. Nobody seems capable of imagining a functioning alternative. That's an extraordinary blind spot for a filmmaker whose earlier work, especially Friends with Benefits, displayed such a sharp eye for the overlapping economies of advertising, media, and modern dating in cities like Los Angeles and New York. Gluck has described himself publicly as a liberal filmmaker, and nothing about One Night Only suggests some hidden right-wing agenda lurking underneath the jokes. The more dispiriting read is simpler and sadder. A hugely successful writer-director has grown so comfortable inside Hollywood's machinery that passive identification has quietly replaced genuine observation. He's not attacking the system. He's not really examining it either. He's just filming inside it. Monica Barbaro carries what Callum Turner can't save. Whatever One Night Only gets right belongs almost entirely to Monica Barbaro, fresh off her Academy Award nomination for playing Joan Baez in A Complete Unknown. She gives Allie the illusion of real depth through sheer force of comic charisma, and the film is at its funniest whenever it simply lets her be unhinged, whether she's belting out a suspiciously catchy pharmaceutical jingle about plaque psoriasis or fleeing half-naked across a Manhattan rooftop with a condom hidden in her mouth to dodge the police. These sequences briefly recover the version of Will Gluck who knows exactly how to turn a movie star into a fearless physical comedian, and they're a reminder of what a stronger script could have done with her. Callum Turner, a BAFTA nominee known for Masters of the Air, and
There's always that one trailer that plays relentlessly before every single movie you see, that pops up during every commercial break, that follows you across social media platforms until you feel like you're being personally haunted by the marketing department. This year, One Night Only absolutely gets that prize, and I'm genuinely not sure I've ever been more thoroughly inundated with marketing for any film in recent memory. The campaign was everywhere: YouTube pre-rolls, Instagram stories, TikTok ads, billboards in major cities, promotional partnerships with dating apps, endless press junkets with the stars making the rounds on talk shows and podcasts. By the time the film actually arrived in theaters, I felt like I'd already seen it 3 times just from the sheer volume of clips and promotional material. But here's the thing about that saturation marketing strategy: it worked. The pitch was simple, memorable, and instantly provocative. It's The Purge but for premarital sex. This is undeniably a very strange, almost bewildering concept for a film, particularly one positioned as a mainstream romantic comedy rather than dystopian satire. The comparison to the Purge franchise immediately conjures images of violent chaos, government-sanctioned lawlessness, and dark social commentary about American society. Applying that same framework to intimate relationships and sexual activity creates immediate cognitive dissonance and immediate curiosity. I won't lie, I was immediately intrigued from the very first teaser. In an era where romantic comedies have become increasingly formulaic, where we can predict every beat of the story from the first 5 minutes, where the genre itself has been struggling to justify its theatrical existence against streaming competition, a genuinely weird high-concept premise like this stands out dramatically. While the premise itself is admittedly pretty far-fetched, requiring significant suspension of disbelief about how American society and government could reach this point, it represents a genuine breath of fresh air to be presented with a love story that doesn't just rely on the usual tired setup of workplace rivals, fake relationships, or return to hometown scenarios. That said, having a unique premise doesn't automatically exempt a film from romantic comedy conventions. And make no mistake, One Night Only is absolutely exploding with genre tropes. The question becomes whether the film can balance its provocative concept with satisfying execution of the familiar beats that audiences expect and enjoy from rom-coms, or whether the strangeness of the premise and the comfort of convention will clash rather than complement each other. The foundation of success, Monica Barbaro and Callum Turner's electric chemistry. Any experienced moviegoer knows that a good romantic comedy is fundamentally, inescapably reliant on the quality of its leads and the chemistry between them. You can have the cleverest script, the most gorgeous cinematography, the best supporting cast, and the perfect soundtrack, but if your central couple doesn't work, if we don't believe in their connection and root for them to end up together, the entire enterprise collapses. It's the one non-negotiable element of the genre. Thankfully, genuinely thankfully, Monica Barbaro and Callum Turner have absolutely electric chemistry together. From their very first interaction, there's a palpable spark, an energy between them that feels natural and unforced. This isn't the result of two attractive people being placed in a frame together and hoping for the best. This is the result of two genuinely talented actors who understand their characters, who listen and react to each other authentically, and who have that indefinable quality that makes movie chemistry work. The structure of the film follows both characters on their separate paths throughout this one extraordinary night as they desperately try to achieve the goal that everyone is pursuing, finding someone to sleep with before the 12-hour window closes. The film cross-cuts between their parallel adventures as they navigate the chaos of New York City transformed into a massive singles event, and they keep accidentally, coincidentally, fatefully coming across each other throughout the night. It's a classic rom-com structure, the near misses, the brief encounters, the gradual realization that maybe the person you've been looking for has been right in front of you all along. It's admittedly a simple enough premise when you strip away the dystopian trappings. These are two people who can't quite see what's right in front of them, who are so focused on their predetermined goals and expectations that they're blind to the obvious connection developing between them. They're even somewhat antagonistic toward each other at the beginning, with their first encounter going disastrously wrong in ways both humiliating and humanizing. This is well-trodden romantic comedy territory, the enemies to lovers or strangers to lovers arc that countless films have executed before. What genuinely impressed me, however, was how naturally Barbaro and Turner were able to progress their dynamic throughout the night. The evolution of their relationship never feels rushed or artificial, despite taking place over the compressed time frame of just 12 hours. We get the typical meet-cute moment completely upended and subverted. Instead of charming awkwardness, we get genuine disaster and embarrassment. Their connection is carefully, thoughtfully teased throughout the runtime rather than being immediately obvious or heavy-handedly telegraphed. Most refreshingly, for the majority of the film's running time, Owen and Allie are actively trying to sleep with other people. They're helping each other pursue other potential partners, serving as wingman and wingwoman for each other, offering advice and encouragement even as we the audience can see what they can't. This approach genuinely felt different from the standard romantic comedy playbook, where couples are usually kept apart by external circumstances, misunderstandings, or existing relationships. Here, the obstacle is simply that they haven't yet realized they're perfect for each other, and the film has the patience and confidence to let that realization develop organically. The musical element, ambition versus execution. One of the character-defining elements of Allie is that she's a trained, talented singer whose crippling stage fright has relegated her to recording commercial jingles rather than performing for live audiences or pursuing the music career she genuinely wants. It's a specific detail that tells us about her fears, her unrealized potential, and the gap between who she is and who she wants to be. Monica Barbaro does perform several musical numbers throughout the film, both the commercial jingles and more personal, emotionally revealing songs. Here's where I need to address something potentially controversial. While Barbaro is certainly a capable singer who can carry a tune and deliver a song competently, she doesn't quite have the exceptionally strong, powerful voice that would be required for someone who supposedly sings professionally for a living. I fully understand the irony of this criticism, since Barbaro obviously was paid for this role and is literally a professional actress who sang in the film. But there's a difference between being good enough to perform songs in a movie and being so good that we believe this character could make a living with their voice. The issue becomes particularly noticeable when Barbaro attempts higher notes, where the strain becomes audible and the technical limitations become apparent. For viewers with musical training or just sensitive ears for vocal performance, this can be genuinely distracting, pulling you out of the emotional moment the film is trying to create. Instead of being swept up in the character's passion and talent, you're thinking about the performer's vocal technique and limitations. Beyond the execution issue, there's also a larger structural problem. there's not actually a good enough payoff with Ali's singing career for it to even be narratively necessary to the story. The film introduces this element, uses it for a few scenes, hints at it representing her fear of vulnerability and being truly seen, but never develops it into a satisfying arc with meaningful resolution. We don't get a triumphant moment where she overcomes her stage fright in a way that feels earned and cathartic. We don't see how her relationship with Owen specifically helps her find her voice in a way that justifies the singing subplot. Honestly, from a screenwriting perspective, they could have just changed her profession to literally anything else and the story would function identically. Make her a graphic designer who's afraid to show her personal artwork. Make her a writer who only does commercial copy instead of the novel she dreams of writing. Make her a chef who works in a corporate cafeteria instead of opening her own restaurant. Any of these would serve the same thematic purpose, illustrating a person whose fear holds them back from their true potential, without requiring the lead actress to have exceptional vocal abilities that might be beyond the casting. Dream sequences and creative choices. Another element that didn't quite land for me was the film's occasional use of dream sequences and fantasy interludes. Several times throughout One Night Only, we suddenly shift into stylized, surreal moments that are eventually revealed to be Ali's imagination or dreams. These sequences have a different visual texture, often more heightened and romantic or sometimes anxiety-driven and nightmarish, representing her internal emotional state. While I understand the creative intent behind these choices, showing us Ali's rich inner life, her romantic fantasies, her fears and anxieties about the night and about connection, they ultimately felt like a bit of a cop-out in execution. Using dream sequences and fantasy is one of the oldest tricks in the cinematic playbook, and it often serves as a way to include visually interesting or emotionally heightened content without having to justify it within the reality of your story world. What made these sequences particularly frustrating is how they're explained away with a rather hand-waving justification that Ali just has an especially creative mind, as if that somehow makes it cinematically legitimate to shift into fantasy without clear markers. The film doesn't establish strong enough visual or audio cues to immediately signal when we've entered a dream or fantasy, meaning that viewers can be several beats into a scene before realizing it's not actually happening. This creates confusion rather than intrigue, distancing us from the story rather than drawing us deeper into the character's psychology.
It was fun, quickly paced, consistently entertaining, and despite all the familiar genre conventions it employs, it delivers a genuinely unique love story. That's actually pretty impressive for a film released in 2025, when it feels like absolutely everything has been done before, when every possible meet cute has been exhausted, when audiences have seen every variation of the basic rom-com formula. The high-concept premise, for all its logical issues and unexplored implications, does provide a freshness that purely conventional romantic comedies can't match. The ticking clock element creates natural urgency and momentum. The shared experience of this bizarre night gives Owen and Ali a foundation for connection beyond just finding each other attractive. The dystopian backdrop, however lightly sketched, makes their romance feel almost revolutionary, finding real connection in a world designed to reduce intimacy to regulated biological function. The film also benefits from releasing at a time when theatrical romantic comedies have become genuinely rare. The genre has largely migrated to streaming platforms, particularly Netflix, which produces dozens of rom-coms each year with varying degrees of quality. But there's something special about the theatrical romantic comedy experience, about watching a love story unfold on a big screen with an engaged audience that laughs together at the jokes and sighs together at the romantic moments. One Night Only understands it's a theatrical experience and delivers the kind of polish and energy that justifies that format. If you're a romantic comedy fan who has been starved for quality theatrical entries in the genre, One Night Only delivers enough charm, chemistry, and entertainment to satisfy that craving. It's not going to revolutionize the genre or become an all-time classic, but it's a solidly enjoyable entry that respects its audience while delivering the familiar pleasures we seek from rom-coms. If you're drawn to high-concept premises and appreciate when filmmakers take creative swings even if they don't fully connect, the sex purge concept provides enough novelty to make this worth your time. Yes, the film doesn't fully explore all the implications of its premise, but it uses that premise effectively enough to create a distinctive backdrop for the love story. If you're a fan of either Monica Barbaro or Callum Turner and want to see them in leading roles that showcase their considerable charm and chemistry, this is absolutely worth watching. These are two talented performers who deserve to become bigger stars, and One Night Only provides them with an excellent showcase. If you're looking for a fun date movie or just want a light, entertaining theatrical experience that will leave you smiling, One Night Only fits the bill perfectly. It's the kind of film that works beautifully as a shared experience, where you can laugh at the jokes together, discuss the bizarre premise afterwards, and just enjoy spending time with characters you like in a world that's interesting despite its logical gaps. However, if you're someone who needs airtight worldbuilding and consistent internal logic, if unanswered questions about how a fictional society functions will genuinely bother you throughout the runtime, you might struggle with One Night Only. The film asks for a significant suspension of disbelief and doesn't reward deep analytical thinking about its premise. If you generally dislike romantic comedies or find the genre's conventions tired and manipulative, One Night Only probably won't convert you. Despite its unique premise, it still hits most of the familiar beats and requires you to accept the emotional logic of the genre. One Night Only represents exactly the kind of theatrical romantic comedy we need more of: films with genuine star chemistry, creative premises that differentiate them from the streaming competition, professional direction that understands both genre conventions and cinematic craft, and the confidence to be unabashedly romantic without tipping into parody. Is it perfect? Absolutely not. The premise raises questions the film has no interest in answering. Some creative choices, like the dream sequences and the emphasis on Ali's singing, don't fully pay off. The supporting characters and cameos are hit and miss in terms of comedic effectiveness. The world building is just detailed enough to make you want more without providing it. But the central romance works, which is the non-negotiable requirement of the genre. Monica Barbaro and Callum Turner create characters we care about in a relationship we believe in and root for. Will Gluck delivers polished, energetic direction that makes the most of New York locations and maintains consistent tone throughout. The premise, however imperfectly executed, provides genuine novelty in a genre that desperately needs fresh approaches. For a genre that has been declared dead approximately 800 times over the past 15 years, One Night Only proves there's still life, still possibility, still an audience hungry for stories about connection and romance delivered with style and charm. It's not going to single-handedly resurrect the theatrical romantic comedy, but it's a welcome, enjoyable entry that reminds us why we fell in love with this genre in the first place. So yes, despite my criticisms and analytical reservations, I'm recommending One Night Only. Go see it in theaters if you can, experience it with an audience, let yourself get swept up in the romance despite the logical gaps, and enjoy spending time with two charming performers navigating one very strange night. Sometimes that's